The swing creaked one last time before the HOA president's hammer came crashing down. Your porch display is an eyesore. You have 24 hours to remove it. But Sarah wasn't about to let Karen ruin her family's summer. That night, under the cover of darkness, a clandestine operation began, one that would rock the neighborhood to its core. Sarah gripped the hammer tightly, sweat beading on her brow as she surveyed the backyard. It was time. With a few swift strikes, the posts holding her beloved porch swing came loose, and the weathered wood clattered to the ground. "There," she muttered, wiping her forehead. "Karen won't be happy about this." Headlights suddenly swept across the yard, and Sarah ducked behind the rose bushes, heart pounding. Peering through the leaves, she watched as the HOA president herself stepped out of her gleaming SUV, clipboard in hand. "I saw that, Sarah." Karen's shrill voice rang out. "You're in violation of the HOA code, again. This behavior is unacceptable." Sarah emerged from her hiding spot, squaring her shoulders. "I didn't have a choice, Karen. You gave me an ultimatum, and I'm not about to let you ruin our family's summer." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Well then, I guess you leave me no choice. I'll be filing a formal complaint first thing in the morning, and you can expect a hefty fine." With a huff, Karen turned on her heel and stormed back to her car, leaving Sarah alone in the darkening yard, her triumph turning to dread. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah couldn't sleep. The threat of a fine loomed large, and she knew she had to do something. An idea began to take shape in her mind, a way to fight back against the tyranny of the HOA. The next morning, Sarah set to work, recruiting her husband and kids to help. They cleared out the space behind the rose bushes, carefully laying the foundation for a new structure. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the outlines of a backyard theater began to take shape. "This is crazy," her husband, Tom, murmured, wiping the sweat from his brow. "But I have to admit, it's kind of brilliant." Sarah grinned. "I'm not about to let Karen and her cronies push us around. This is our home, and we're going to take it back, one movie night at a time." The sounds of construction soon drew the attention of the other neighbors, who gathered at the fence to see what was going on. Some shook their heads disapprovingly, while others watched with a glimmer of curiosity in their eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow next door, called out. Sarah paused, wiping her hands on her jeans. "We're building a backyard theater, Mrs. Henderson. Karen tried to ban my porch swing, so we're taking matters into our own hands." Mrs. Henderson's brow furrowed. "Well, I'd never. The nerve of that woman. You know, I might just have to join you for one of those movie nights." Sarah's face lit up. "Really? That would be wonderful." She turned to the other neighbors. "Everyone's invited, of course. We're going to show the best movies, have popcorn, and stick it to the HOA once and for all." The crowd murmured in approval, and Sarah felt a surge of triumph. She was going to win this fight, no matter what it took. The news of Sarah's backyard theater projects spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Some residents were intrigued, while others, like Karen, were furious. "This is a direct violation of the HOA guidelines." Karen ranted, her face flushed with anger as she stormed up to Sarah's door. "You have 48 hours to dismantle that monstrosity or face legal action." Sarah stood her ground, refusing to back down. "I'm sorry, Karen, but this is our property, and we have the right to use it as we see fit. The backyard theater is staying, and we're going to enjoy it, whether you like it or not." Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. "We'll see about that." With a huff, she turned and stalked back to her car, leaving Sarah with a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. Over the next few days, the construction of the backyard theater continued, with the entire neighborhood pitching in. Mrs. Henderson, true to her word, became an enthusiastic supporter, even donating a vintage popcorn machine to the cause. "This is going to be the talk of the town," she chuckled, watching as the young neighborhood kids helped to paint the screen. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of community she hadn't experienced in years. I just hope Karen doesn't find a way to ruin it. As the opening night approached, the tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. Karen had been spotted talking to a lawyer, and rumors began to swirl about potential legal action. On the eve of the big event, Sarah and Tom gathered the family for a meeting. "Listen up, everyone," Sarah said, her voice serious. "We need to be prepared for anything. Karen is not going to back down without a fight, and we need to be ready to defend our backyard theater." Tom nodded, his brow furrowed. "She's right. We need to be vigilant, and we need to be smart. If she tries to shut us down, we'll have to be ready to stand our ground." The kids looked at their parents with a mix of fear and excitement. They knew that their family was about to embark on a battle that could have serious consequences, but they were also eager to be a part of something that felt so important. As the sun set on the evening of the opening night, Sarah and Tom gathered the family and took one last look at the backyard theater. It was a sight to behold, a testament to the power of community and the determination to stand up against injustice. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and trepidation. The family nodded, and together they stepped out into the night, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night of the backyard theater's grand opening arrived, and the neighborhood was buzzing with excitement. Families from all over gathered, clutching their lawn chairs and popcorn buckets, eager to be a part of this act of defiance against the HOA. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah and Tom stood at the entrance, greeting their guests with warm smiles. But their excitement was tinged with a sense of unease, as they knew that Karen and her cronies were sure to make an appearance. Sure enough, just as the opening credits began to roll, the sound of a car engine pierced the night air. Sarah's heart sank as she watched Karen's black SUV pull up to the curb, the woman herself stepping out with a thunderous expression. "You have some nerve, Sarah," Karen shouted, storming up to the makeshift theater. "I've spoken to my lawyer, and he says this whole thing is a flagrant violation of the HOA bylaws. You have until the end of the movie to dismantle this monstrosity, or I'll have you all arrested for trespassing." The crowd erupted in outraged murmurs, and Sarah stepped forward, her chin held high. "Karen, this is our property, and we have the right to use it as we see fit. The backyard theater stays, and you can't do a thing about it." Karen's nostrils flared, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Mrs. Henderson beat her to it. Now, Karen, let's not get too hasty," the elderly woman said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "These folks are just trying to have a little fun, and I, for one, think it's a wonderful idea. Why don't you join us? I'm sure the popcorn is delicious." Karen's face turned an ugly shade of red, and she glared at Mrs. Henderson. "I will not be bullied in my own neighborhood. This is an outrage, and I won't stand for it." With that, she turned and stormed back to her car, slamming the door with a resounding thud. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Sarah let out a sigh of relief. But her moment of triumph was short-lived as she caught sight of Karen's lawyer emerging from the passenger side of the car, a determined expression on his face. "This isn't over," he called out, before following Karen back to her vehicle. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, and she knew that the battle with the HOA was far from over. As the movie continued to play, she couldn't help but worry about what Karen and her lawyer had up their sleeves. One thing was certain: she and her family were in for a fight, and they were going to have to be prepared for anything. The following day, Sarah and Tom awoke to the sound of a commotion outside. Peering out the window, they saw a small army of workmen descending on their backyard, armed with tools and a large, menacing-looking fence. "What in the world?" Sarah gasped, rushing outside in her bathrobe. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step back," one of the workers said, brandishing a clipboard. "We've been instructed by the HOA to erect a barrier around your property, effective immediately." Sarah's blood ran cold. The HOA. But they can't do that. This is our private property. The worker shrugged. I'm just following orders, ma'am. If you have a problem with it, you'll have to take it up with the HOA. Sarah whirled around to find Karen standing on the sidewalk, a smug expression on her face. Good morning, Sarah, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I see you've met my crew. They'll be installing a lovely new fence around your backyard to ensure that your little theater doesn't interfere with the rest of the neighborhood's enjoyment of their property. Sarah's fists clenched at her sides. You can't do this, Karen. This is harassment, pure and simple. Karen tutted. Oh, I think you'll find that I can. The HOA has the authority to enforce the bylaws, and your backyard theater is a clear violation. This fence is just the beginning. If you don't dismantle it by the end of the day, we'll be forced to take further action. With that, she turned on her heel and sauntered back to her car, leaving Sarah and Tom to stare in disbelief at the workers who were already beginning to erect the fence. This is unbelievable, Tom muttered, his face twisted in anger. We can't just let them do this. Sarah nodded, her mind racing. We have to fight back, Tom. We can't let Karen and the HOA bully us out of our own home. Gathering the kids, they held an emergency family meeting, laying out the situation and brainstorming ideas for how to stop the fence from being installed. Maybe we could try to get a court order to stop them. Their eldest daughter, Emily, suggested. That's a good idea, Sarah said, but it's going to take time, and we need to act fast. In the meantime, we need to find a way to stall the workers and buy ourselves some time. The family huddled together, their faces set with determination. They were not about to let Karen and the HOA win this battle without a fight. As the workers continued to erect the fence, Sarah and her family sprang into action. Tom quickly gathered up a group of their most trusted neighbors, including Mrs. Henderson, and they began to devise a plan of attack. We need to disrupt their work as much as possible, Tom said, his eyes narrowing. If we can stall them long enough, maybe we can get a court order to stop the installation. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her ancient face set with determination. Leave it to me, dear. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. With that, the elderly woman hobbled over to the workers, a sweet smile on her face. Excuse me, young man, she said, her voice survey. I couldn't help but notice you're putting up a fence on my property. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to stop. The worker blinked in confusion. Ma'am, this isn't your property. It belongs to the Johnsons, and we've been instructed by the HOA to install this fence. Mrs. Henderson tisked and shook her head. Oh, my dear boy, you must be mistaken. This is my property, and I most certainly don't want a fence here. It would ruin the lovely view of the backyard theater. The worker hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I have my orders. I can't just stop the work. Well then, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, I'm afraid I'll have to call the police. You're trespassing on my property, and I won't stand for it. The worker's eyes widened, and he quickly called his supervisor over to the scene. As the two men argued, Sarah and Tom seized the opportunity to rally more neighbors to their cause. Soon, a small crowd had gathered, all of them voicing their opposition to the fence and the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. The workers, visibly flustered, began to slow their progress, and Sarah could see the frustration building on Karen's face as she watched from the sidelines. Just then, a police car pulled up, and the officers stepped out, surveying the scene. What's going on here? One of them asked, his brow furrowed. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her chin held high. These men are trespassing on my property and trying to erect a fence without my permission. I demand that you stop them immediately. The officers exchanged a glance, then turned to the workers. You heard the lady. Pack it up and get off her property. The workers, cowed by the presence of the police, reluctantly began to dismantle the partially erected fence. Karen, her face a mask of fury, stormed over to the officers. "You can't do this," she cried. "This is a matter for the HOA, not the police." The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, if this is your property, then you have no right to be installing a fence without the owner's permission. We're here to enforce the law, not the HOA's rules." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the officer held up a hand. "I suggest you take this up with your lawyer, ma'am. In the meantime, these workers need to clear out." With that, the police officers turned and walked away, leaving a fuming Karen and a triumphant Sarah and her family. The battle had been won, for now, but Sarah knew that the war with the HOA was far from over. As the dust settled and the workers packed up their tools, Sarah and her family gathered together, their faces flushed with victory. "We did it," Emily cried, jumping up and down. "We stopped the fence." Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug, relief and pride washing over her. "Yes, we did. But this isn't over, sweetheart. Karen and the HOA are going to keep coming after us." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "She's right. We need to be prepared for whatever they throw at us next." The family huddled together, brainstorming ideas for how to protect their backyard theater and their right to use their own property. They knew that Karen would not give up easily, and they needed to be one step ahead of her. As the sun began to set, Sarah and Tom decided to gather the neighborhood for an emergency meeting. They needed to rally their supporters and get them on board for the battles to come. The word spread quickly, and soon the backyard was filled with concerned residents, all eager to hear what Sarah and Tom had to say. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "As you know, the HOA has been trying to shut down our backyard theater, and they're not going to stop until they get their way." The crowd erupted into boos and shouts of outrage, and Sarah held up her hand to quiet them. I know. But we can't let them win. We need to stick together and fight back, because this isn't just about our theater. It's about our right to use our own property as we see fit." Tom stepped forward, his face set with determination. "That's why we're proposing a neighborhood watch. We need to be vigilant, constantly on the lookout for any new moves from the HOA. If they try to pull another stunt like the fence, we need to be ready to shut it down." The crowd murmured in agreement, and several people stepped forward to volunteer. "I'll be on the lookout every night," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes shining. "Those HOA bullies won't get past me." Sarah felt a swell of gratitude and pride. "Thank you, all of you. We're in this together, and we're not going to let Karen and the HOA push us around." As the meeting drew to a close, Sarah and Tom made their way back to the house, their shoulders a little straighter and their spirits a little lighter. They knew that the battle was far from over, but they were determined to win. "We're not going to let them win, Tom," Sarah said, her voice laced with determination. "This is our home, and we're going to fight for it, no matter what it takes." Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood watch established by Sarah and Tom kept a close eye on the HOA's activities. Karen and her cronies were spotted making frequent visits to the neighborhood, often conferring with their lawyer in hushed tones. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone in the community was on high alert, ready to spring into action at the first sign of trouble. One evening, as the family was gathered around the backyard theater, enjoying a movie under the stars, a commotion erupted at the front of the house. Sarah and Tom rushed to the source of the disturbance, only to find a group of uniformed officers standing on their doorstep. "What's going on?" Sarah demanded, her heart pounding. "Ma'am, we have a court order to shut down your backyard theater," one of the officers said, his voice grave. "Apparently, you're in violation of several HOA regulations." Sarah's jaw dropped, and Tom stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. We've done nothing wrong, and we have every right to use our own property as we see fit." The officer shook his head. "I'm sorry, but the order is clear. You have 24 hours to dismantle the theater or face arrest for trespassing. Before Sarah or Tom could respond, a familiar voice rang out from the crowd that had gathered. "I told you this wouldn't end well, Sarah," Karen sneered, stepping forward with a triumphant grin. "You should have listened to me and taken down that eyesore when you had the chance." Sarah felt her blood boil, and she had to restrain herself from lunging at the woman. "This isn't over, Karen," she hissed through gritted teeth. "We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." Karen's smile only widened. "We'll see about that. In the meantime, I suggest you start packing up your little theater. You have 24 hours. With that, the officers turned and left, leaving the neighborhood in a state of shock and dismay. Sarah and Tom were devastated, but they knew they couldn't give up. As the sun set, the family gathered once more, their faces etched with determination. "We can't let them win," Emily said, her voice quivering with emotion. "This is our home, and we have to fight for it." Tom nodded, his expression resolute. "And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're not going down without a fight." The family huddled together, their minds racing as they plotted their next move. They knew that the battle with the HOA was far from over, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to protect their backyard theater and their way of life. As the 24-hour deadline loomed, Sarah and her family sprang into action. They knew that they couldn't simply give up and dismantle the backyard theater. Their very way of life was at stake. Tom and the older kids worked tirelessly to fortify the structure, reinforcing the supports and weatherproofing the screen. Meanwhile, Sarah rallied the rest of the neighborhood, calling in every favor and pulling out all the stops to build support for their cause. Mrs. Henderson, true to her word, became the unofficial leader of the resistance, organizing a round-the-clock vigil to keep watch for any sign of the HOA or the police. "We're not going to let them take this away from us without a fight," the feisty old woman declared, her eyes blazing with determination. The day of the deadline arrived, and the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Residents gathered in the backyard, their faces set with defiance, ready to defend their beloved theater with everything they had. As the sun began to set, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and Sarah's heart sank. She knew that the moment of truth had arrived. A convoy of police cars and HOA officials descended on the property, and Karen stepped forward, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Time's up, Sarah," she announced, her voice dripping with smugness. "You have one last chance to dismantle this eyesore before we do it for you, and arrest you for trespassing." Sarah stepped forward, her chin held high. "We're not going anywhere, Karen. This is our property, and we have every right to use it as we see fit. You can't bully us out of our own home." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she turned to the police officers. "Arrest them all for trespassing. We're taking this theater down, one way or another." The officers hesitated, their expressions uncertain. They had witnessed the community's unwavering support for the backyard theater, and they didn't feel comfortable simply arresting the entire neighborhood. "Ma'am, I'm not sure we can do that," one of the officers said, his brow furrowed. "These people have a right to be on their own property." Karen's face flushed with rage. "Are you kidding me? This is an outrage. I demand that you follow through on the court order." But the officers stood their ground, refusing to budge. The standoff continued for what felt like an eternity, the air thick with tension and defiance. Finally, Karen let out a frustrated growl and turned on her heel, storming back to her car. The crowd erupted into cheers, their faces alight with triumph. Sarah and Tom embraced, tears of joy streaming down their faces. They had won. Against all odds, they had stood up to the HOA and come out on top. As the neighborhood gathered for a celebratory movie night, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. This was more than just a backyard theater. It was a symbol of their community's resilience, their refusal to be bullied, and their unwavering commitment to their way of life. And as the credits rolled on the screen, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. The battle with the HOA was far from over, but she and her family were ready to fight, no matter what it took.